shouting for war, some crying for peace. Inside the White House, President Woodrow Wilson conferred with advisors, then signed the proclamation of war against Germany.
Germany, 1918. The country was still recovering in the aftermath of World War I, and Arthur Scherbius, understanding the benefits of secure communications, had built a mechanical cipher machine, which he dubbed Schlüsselmaschine E, which was meant to be uncrackable by any enemy. Unaware of the fact that he was about to change the course of cryptography and potentially the outcome of the next World War. Today, this renowned machine is now known by the name it was later patented under: Enigma. Getting its name from the Greek word enigma, meaning dark saying or speaking in riddles, Enigma first hit the shelves of the commercial market in 1923. It had a single critical purpose: to protect commercial, diplomatic, and military communications. How did Enigma accomplish this? Encryption. A common method of espionage is intercepting a message via radio broadcast or by obtaining a physical copy. Encryption ingeniously deals with this by scrambling your message according to a specific algorithm called an encryption key. Only someone with whom you've shared this encryption key can decrypt the message. To anyone else, it simply looks like gibberish. This allows for widely broadcasting your encrypted messages over radio frequencies that anyone can listen in on, making sending and receiving information fast and easy. This leaves any prying eyes empty-handed with nothing but nonsensical, random letters. A simple method of encryption is a Caesar cipher. To use the Caesar cipher, take each letter of the message and shift it to the right of the alphabet by a fixed number. If a letter is shifted past Z, it wraps around to A again. For example, if you had a shift of +3, the letter A shifts to become D, B becomes E, and so on. Let's encrypt the word hello. H becomes K, E becomes H, L becomes O, O becomes O again, and finally, O becomes R. Now we have our encoded message. To decrypt it, all we need to do is shift the letters in the opposite direction that we did before. So now we use a key of -3 to turn K to H, H to E, and so on to reveal the hidden message. This technique was used by Julius Caesar, who used a shift of +3 to protect military communications. However, there are two fatal flaws with this method. One is something you might have noticed when we were encrypting our message. The two L's both became O's, giving us a hint that there's a repeating letter in that word. This also means that any O in the message will result in the same letter after decrypting. The second is that there are only 26 possible combinations to try, making it not secure against anyone who knows anything about cryptography. So what if we made a much more complex way of encrypting things, making it impossible to just guess? Well, that's exactly what Enigma did. Disclaimer: I'm only going to discuss what happened to each letter as the signal passed through the machine. I won't be discussing the circuitry behind it in detail to keep this explanation as simple as possible. The machine was composed of 4 main sections: the keyboard and plug board used for inputs, the internals that encrypt each letter, and the lamp board, which displays the resulting encrypted letter, which was then copied down one by one to write the now encrypted message. Let's say you have a keyboard with 26 letters for inputs and 26 light-up letters as outputs. The simplest possible machine is lighting up the same letter as you enter. To encrypt it, we could scramble the wires inside to display a semi-random letter. This solution isn't ideal because anybody who reverse engineered the machine would be able to figure out the pairings and decrypt the messages quite easily. So what did Enigma do to make it so hard to crack? Inside the machine, there's a set of 3 rotors, each one with 26 inputs and 26 outputs. Each input has a corresponding number to the letter it represents in the alphabet. For example, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, you get the idea. Inside the rotor, the wires connecting the inputs and outputs are scrambled. For example, A could turn into Y, B could turn into G, with no pattern to it. Even though these connections could not be changed, each rotor had its own unique internal wiring, and its position could be switched with other rotors to change the encryption. Also, after every key press, the rightmost rotor will rotate once. Once the rightmost rotor has done a full rotation, the middle rotor will also spin once. Then, once the middle one has done a full rotation, the very left one will rotate once. This makes 26 to the power of 3, or 17,576 different combinations. Additionally, there was the plug board. Its interface had each of the 26 letters of the Latin alphabet, along with 10 double-sided plugs. This allowed you to manually manipulate what letter turned into what by plugging one side of the plug to one letter and the other side to a different letter. If nothing is plugged into the input, the letter simply stays as is. When a key is pressed, the rightmost rotor rotates once, then the signal travels from the keyboard to the plug board to be changed into something new. Then it goes to the rotors to be changed once, then twice, then 3 times. And actually, at the end, there's a reflector that changes it once, then sends the signal back through the rotors to be changed 3 more times, for a total of 7 times. Then it goes back to the plug board to potentially be changed once more before finally lighting up the encrypted letter to the lamp board. Then you'd write that letter down in the message. Repeat this process until the full message has been encrypted. This machine removed the flaws of the previously mentioned Caesar cipher. Because at least one of the 3 rotors will rotate with every key press, a repeated letter would become 2 different letters in the encryption. Also, the total number of combinations for the Enigma machine is 158 million, making it virtually impossible to randomly guess. This seems also complex, so how could the Germans possibly decrypt these messages? Well, first of all, the Enigma is symmetrically designed. This means that with the right starting settings, it will give you the original letter when typing the encrypted one. There were 4 of these starting settings that could be changed. Rotor order. The Enigma came with a set of 5 rotors. Pick 3 and put them in the right order. Ring order. Set which letter the rotor would cause the next one to advance. Rotor starting position. The numbers of each rotor are displayed above the lamp board and could be rotated with the exposed gear. Lastly, the plug board connections, the ones that manually override the letter encryption mentioned earlier. The Germans had code sheets with what settings to use on what day of the month. A new one was handed out every month for an extra layer of security. People such as radio operators, commanders, naval officers, and Air Force/Army units were all given copies of these code sheets. The machine proved to be incredibly useful, allowing the Germans peace of mind over the security of their plans. But while broadcasting their messages over the radio, the British, despite not understanding, were listening. Alan Turing was born on the 23rd of June, 1912. He was remarkably bright in his youth, and he taught himself how to read in only 3 weeks. He then started learning Latin in primary school. This caused one of his headmistresses to say, "I have had clever boys and hard-working boys, but Alan is a genius." In his later years, he was a mathematician, computer scientist, logician, philosopher, and cryptanalyst. He then joined the British secret code-breaking group called the Ultra Project at Bletchley Park. At the start of the war, the station only had 200 workers composed of mathematicians and scientists alike. The top 4 were Gordon Welshman, Alan Turing, Hugh Alexander, and Stuart Milner Barry, who were referred to as the Wicked Uncles. At first, Gordon Welshman used a method now known as traffic analysis to partly decrypt these messages. However, he first noticed that the call signs were at the top of the page, and actually in plain text. This allowed the British to know the sender and recipient of the messages, as well as the location, giving them helpful information, even without any decryption. The team at Bletchley Park discovered 2 Enigma flaws that could prove useful for cracking it. They realized that the plug board was reciprocal, meaning if T becomes B, that B also becomes T. This alone was not enough to crack it. However, that was not the only discovery they made. You see, Enigma couldn't physically output the same letter that was inputted. That doesn't sound like a huge deal, but that, coupled with the first flaw, allowed the British to devise a method to uncover the secrets that Enigma was so closely hiding. If you know a word that would possibly appear in a message, you can line it up to different places in the message to see if any of the letters line up. If they do, that means it either isn't in the message or it's in a different place. Every morning at 6 a.m., the Germans sent out a weather report over the radio. So every morning at 6 a.m., the British would intercept it and use that to try to decrypt Enigma before midnight when the code changes. What's one word that appears at the end of every German message? Hail Hitler. As Benedict Cumberbatch put it,
turns out that's the only German you need to know to break Enigma.
Workers were fighting to guess the right settings once they had the Enigma machines themselves. The method they used goes like this. First, line up a word that you think will appear in that place, usually Hail Hitler at the end of the message. Then take a random guess at which letter could be connected to what with the plug board. The British would know the wiring of the rotors, but still had to guess the position of them. So they would take a guess and see what the output of the plug board is when inputted to the rotors. Whatever letter is outputted must be on the plug board and connected to a letter you're expecting. Then repeat. If the connections that you deduce don't contradict each other, continue. But if you find that two things need to connect to the same letter on the plug board, that means you have to try again. So try a new plug board combination for every letter. If nothing works, now move one rotor once and go through the whole process again. This is obviously impossibly slow. Even if it took 1 second to test a setting, it would take a single person more than 5 billion years to try all the combinations at that rate. For a sense of scale, if you got a modern supercomputer to try to brute force Enigma, it would still take 5,000 years. In this scenario, whatever you're trying to intercept is most likely not very useful information anymore. Whatever event you are trying to eavesdrop on was probably written in a newspaper that's already decomposed. However, Alan made a useful discovery that would speed that process up a lot. If you find a contradiction when brute forcing, then that means any of the pairings you deduced earlier are all wrong, and you can ignore them. Alan designed a machine called BOMB that would use these flaws to check possible settings incredibly quickly. Assembly began in September 1939. Once it deduced a group of pairings wrong, it would click and try the next combination. Once it was on, they could do nothing but listen to the rhythmic clicking of the machine. And on March 18th, 1940, what the Polish and British tried to do in 9 years was done by BOMB in just 20 minutes, causing it to be called Victory. It was delivered to Bletchley Park shortly after, only 5.5 months after assembly began. It needed some refinement and optimization before it could consistently and reliably find the settings of the messages. Gordon was a big part of this optimization stage, and after a year, Victory was able to quickly find the settings of any intercepted Enigma message. Winston Churchill called these decrypted messages golden eggs. The British first used Enigma to gain an edge in the Battle of the Atlantic, where they could know the position and movement of German U-boats, allowing them to safely maneuver around them. But at this point, the Germans still didn't know that the British had successfully cracked Enigma. And it would stay this way until the 1970s. The British never flaunted the fact they cracked it, even in their own newspaper. This so the Germans didn't change their encryption method to something potentially harder to crack, causing the British to start over. Even after the war, they kept their machine a close secret, as it could also decrypt Enigma-like machines that were used commonly by many countries in Europe. In 1974, a book titled The Ultra Secret by F.W. Winterbotham was published, which detailed the work done at Bletchley Park and revealed the extent of the intelligence gathered from decrypted Enigma messages. Anyone still using the machine now knew that it was useless and gave it up, leading to the death of Enigma, leaving behind a famous mark on cryptography history.